it wasn't a little girl. I was camping in New Mexico with my husband's family near a deserted lake. We were a group of about 10 plus 6 more people who were camping nearby. After dark, we were enjoying the traditions of camping, sipping beers, roasting s'mores, and swapping ghost stories, when all of a sudden, we heard eerie cries for help that clearly belonged to a terrified child. However, neither group had any children with them. We decided to investigate the source of the haunting noises together. There was a field behind our campsites, and a terrifying image awaited us. A ghostly figure, completely white and very tall, standing roughly 100 feet away from us. At least 6 feet in height, it had an unsettlingly skeletal figure. The atmosphere became increasingly eerie as we keep hearing the cries for help of a little girl lingered in the darkness as we tried to sleep.
The Walking Dead. I'm a psychiatric nurse, and early in my career, I worked at a residential mental health facility. One of our residents was an elective mute, which means that he couldn't talk, but there were no medical reasons as to why. He had spoken earlier in his life, and in fact seemed quite normal back then, with the exception of being close to 7 feet tall. He'd been raised in the Deep South and joined the military when he was 19, but one night he vanished. He was declared old, and eventually he was declared missing and dead. 10 years later, a 7-foot-tall man walked into a VI hospital emergency room in my part of the Midwest and said to the receptionist, "My name is Marion Duchesne, not the real name, and I've been dead for 10 years. Those were the last words he ever spoke. He was covered with dust, and he was wearing the same clothes he'd been reported to be wearing the night he vanished. His social security number had not been used, and he had no identification on his person. However, they were able to identify him, I guess via fingerprints. The family was notified, but they said they had already grieved their lost man, and that whomever was claiming to be him simply could not be. They demanded not to be contacted again." Marion paced all day every day, moving his mouth that looked like talking or muttering, but no sound came out. He had an unnerving habit of throwing his head back with his mouth wide open, as if he were laughing heartily, but not even a breath could be heard. If I talked to him, he appeared to listen, periodically throwing his head back in that laughter-mimicking way of his. Various medications were tried, but they did not affect him either positively or negatively. Occupational therapy did nothing because Marion would just grin, and unless told to stay put, he'd get up and start pacing again. On my last day at that job, the last thing I saw was Marion pacing in the parking lot, throwing his head back to laugh. Later, I wondered if all along I'd been dealing with a ghost. All these years later, I still don't know.
The unrest stopped. I was driving across country with my mom and sister when I was 16 and my sister was 20. It was late, but we were well rested still and alert. We were driving along an interstate and needed gas and a bathroom break, so we stopped at the only rest stop in 200 miles. There was a van full of teenagers on a road trip at the gas station, as well as a small gray car parked at the pump in front of us with 2 young men standing still outside of it. When we got there, everything felt wrong. We'd been on the road for days and seen many rest stops at night and had never been afraid until then. My mom and sister went inside and I stayed in the car. I heard the teenagers say they were creeped out and couldn't get the pump to work, and they left in a hurry. I was watching the car in front of us, and the 2 men had not moved at all. Not an inch. They weren't talking. They weren't on phones. They were just standing there, still as stone. My sister and mom came running back out to the car, and when they got in, the 2 men slowly turned to look at us while not moving or pivoting the rest of their bodies. And I swear to fucking shit, we all saw the same thing. They had eyes dark as pitch and empty. Truly empty. Not black. Not reflecting any light at all. Just a void. We sped out of there and didn't stop until we were in the next city. The worst thing about the entire experience? We couldn't find the place on any map. We knew exactly which spot on the interstate to look, and we couldn't find it on Google Maps or any paper map we had. We even asked locals about the creepy gas station out on that stretch of road and got only confused looks. We've traveled on that interstate since, and there is no rest stop.
dancing footsteps. Every time I stay at my grandma's house, I hear someone walking upstairs. It starts at one side of the room, casually walks to the other, and stops. This will happen maybe twice a night. I didn't start hearing it until I was about 14, when my grandparents made me start sleeping in a different room on the first floor because they started sleeping in separate bedrooms. Both of their rooms are also on the first floor. For a little backstory, I have always been afraid of the upstairs at their house. I don't know why, but it always freaked me out. There's one room specifically, though. It's a long, narrow bedroom. When you open the door, there are closets on your left and right, a bed placed roughly in the middle of the room, and a window on the far side opposite the door. I was told growing up by my grandparents that the sons of the previous owner claimed to see a gorilla come out of the closet at night, dance around the room, and go back into the closet. I thought nothing of this story until I had to start sleeping in the other room, the room located directly below the scary room upstairs. So we all go to bed. All the lights in the house are off and I'm still awake, lying on the bed. Then I heard it. Thump. 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 Starting at one end of the room upstairs. It got closer to me, passed right above me, and continued to the end of the room, where it stopped. I'm wide awake, terrified out of my mind. It was no question to me that I had heard footsteps. I knew that slow, casual pace. I was freaked out and went to my grandpa's room. I told him what I heard. He told me that the house is old and it creaks, but he turned the dining room light on for me, so I felt a little safer. I tried going back to sleep. Then it started again, this time from where it ended the first time, by the window upstairs. It walks over me again and stops when it reached the door. I thought it was over until 5 seconds later when I heard it coming down the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Silence as it reached the landing. Then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And silence again as it reached the first floor. I was frozen in shock. Whatever it was on my floor of the house, and sadly unaffected by the dining room light. I was staring at the doorway to my room. The dining room light was shining in, and my vision began to distort. I felt dizzy with fear, so I pulled the blankets over my head and suddenly heard a scratching sound from inside my room. I knew exactly where it was coming from, my grandpa's gun case. It was a very obvious sound, scratching on the wood, long scratches down the front of the gun case door. I could even hear the door ever so slightly tapping against the frame as each scratch began. I tried to scream and I couldn't. I took a second to take a deep breath and let out a loud scream. In seconds, my grandpa had made it to my room, and I was relieved. Needless to say, he still didn't believe me. So I did what any normal person would do. I draped a sheet over the side of the bed and slept underneath it. I wrapped myself tight in a comforter, put on headphones, and turned my back to the door. There could be a party of ghosts in my room and I wouldn't even know. The next morning, my grandpa told my grandma about what happened the night before. She said, "Oh, that's silly. You know, your cousin woke me up the last time she stayed here. She came in my room saying I hear footsteps. I slept under the bed for the rest of my week. Stay with them. I've stayed there countless times since that happened, and I hear the footsteps every time. I sleep on top of the bed now, but keep my back to the door and sleep with headphones on. I haven't heard it come down the stairs since that first night, but if it does, I don't want to know."
It came for us in the graveyard. We were driving my friend's really old beat-up Subaru through a massive graveyard. We stopped and walked down a hill and came across a little pond. There was someone sitting on a rock on the other side of the pond. The figure was all black and we couldn't make out any features other than the fact it looked like a man who was wearing some old-style top hat. We stupidly waved and shouted hi. He didn't show any acknowledgement and continued sitting still on the rock. All of a sudden, he jumped to his feet, started running to us on the water, and then vanished in thin air about halfway on the pond. My friends and I screamed and ran back to the car. The car wouldn't start, and we heard something banging on the back of the car. It wasn't a constant bang, but every few seconds or so we'd hear it. Nobody was outside from what we could see in the dark, but something was making a noise on the car. I opened my phone and started dialing my mom to come give us a boost, but I had no service. None of us had any cell service. The next 30 minutes were spent trying to get her car started. No banging was heard afterwards, but we felt this heavy pressure around us. Car started and she hit the pedal to the metal. We sped out of the graveyard so fast. Immediately crossing the gates, all of our phones regained cell service. One thing I know for certain is that someone or something was out there, and it was not an animal or a human. About a month ago, I went over to my girlfriend's house. Except I felt really uneasy when I went into the living room. Turns out, they replaced a china cabinet with one of her grandmothers whom passed away a few months back. Her grandmother was bedridden in the hospital and I've never gotten to meet her. I felt uneasy the whole time. Being around her grandmother's furniture made me so anxious and almost sad. When I told her, she said it was probably nothing. She went to the bathroom. When I went over to the cabinet, it was about 6 feet tall, dark wood. It had 2 doors on the side and glass up front, and in the back was a mirror. I was looking at the teacups and small baby dolls when I could swear I saw someone in the mirror behind me. Just a silhouette. I called out to my girlfriend, but as I did, I heard a shrill screech from the bathroom. I start pounding on the door, and it opens. She was sitting on the floor, crying. She said she saw someone in the bathroom mirror. We booked it out of her house. No shoes, no jacket, nothing. Just ran out right into my car. I drove for an hour or so with no destination. When I returned her to her house, her mom was sitting on the doorstep. She said she kept seeing shadows move. It was good to see an old friend. When I was 37, I went to my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car. The distance was about 35 miles through a very rural and almost abandoned part of the country. About 3 miles outside of town, I see someone on the side of the road, flagging me down. It turned out that it was one of the guys I had attended school with. Jim gets in the car, and we start talking. I had not seen him in 20 years, but he still looked the same, maybe a little older. We get to town, and I ask him if he wants to come to the VFW and have a drink. He says no, just take me home. Jim's parents had lived only a few blocks from my grandmother's house, and I turned in that direction, but he said to take him to the outskirts of town. There was a mobile home park out there, and I figured that is where he lived. When we reached the end of the turnoff, he said, just drop me here. It was good to see you again, and he walks off into the night. I go to the VFW, met some of my old classmates. We start to talk. As we are talking about who is coming to the reunion, I mentioned that I had just picked Jim up 3 miles east of town and had dropped him off. Everyone gets quiet, even the guy singing karaoke stops and lays down the mic. My cousin goes white as a new t-shirt. Barb, Jim died on that curve 8 years ago. Rolled his car. We were all at his funeral, I was told. I started to feel really dizzy, and I went out to the car to take some deep breaths. There on the seat is the local newspaper, printed 8 years previous, containing Jim's obituary. I still have the paper.
It's a chilly autumn day, and school's just ended. Everyone's gone in different directions, and I'm left to walk home alone. The sun's setting, casting eerie shadows on the streets. Leaves rustle ominously in the wind, and my nerves are on edge. I pick up my pace, wanting to escape this creepy vibe. The familiar neighborhood now feels eerie, and I hug my backpack tight for comfort. As I turn a corner, I stumble upon a dimly lit alleyway. A strange feeling creeps over me, like someone's watching my every move. I look around but see nothing. Then, a faint, chilling whisper reaches my ears. Help me, please. It's coming from the alley I just passed. My heart races, but curiosity gets the best of me. I head into the alley, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. The whisper guides me to a rundown building. Its windows are shattered and the front door hangs off its hinges. The voice grows more urgent, and I can't ignore it anymore. I push open the door and step inside. The air inside is damp and heavy, with a strong smell of decay. The whisper leads me deeper, my footsteps echoing on creaky floorboards. Finally, I reach a small, decrepit room where the voice seems to come from. In the corner, I see her, a girl with long, tangled hair, her face hidden in the shadows. I ask if she's okay, but she slowly turns, revealing hollow eyes and a twisted grin. Fear seizes me as she lunges forward, her hands like gnarled claws. I bolt out of the room, and the whisper becomes maniacal laughter. Echoing as I run, I finally make it home, gasping for breath and slam the door shut behind me. I'm safe, but the horrors of that walk will never leave me.
I lived in an old apartment in 2002. The place was built in 1900, so it was just over 100 years old when I moved in. The living room and kitchen were fine, but the bathroom and bedroom were unnerving, like I just always felt like I was being watched, especially in the bedroom if the closet door was open. Those unnerving feelings just became moderately uncomfortable as I settled in. I felt safe in the bedroom, but only if the door was locked. One night, I was dead asleep when there was a loud bang on my bedroom door. When I got up the courage to get out of bed, I checked the apartment and all the windows were closed and locked from the inside. The door still had the chain secured. No one was in there. I mentioned the closet in the bedroom. I never liked going in there, and I never liked if the door was open. For some reason, in my head, I would hear gasping noises. So for that reason, the closet stayed closed. A month or more after I was woken to the bang on my door, I was dead asleep. But something woke me up, and it was a pressure on me like being held down. It was pitch black in my room. I couldn't see anything, but I knew some was standing over me. When I could finally turn on a bedside lamp, no one was there. After that, I couldn't sleep in the dark. I had to sleep with a lamp on. That incident scared the life out of me. And after that, the unnerving feeling of being watched intensified. Friends would come over and comment about being uncomfortable in the bathroom like being watched. It became so uncomfortable for me. When I had the chance to move to another unit, I jumped at it. I packed up and got out. After me, several people rented the apartment, and they would move out within months. I became friendly with the building manager, and I told him that I felt the place was haunted. He kind of laughed it off. Years later, they were renovating the place. The building manager was doing some painting there, and the building owner was there too. I went and checked out the apartment, and it looked nicer. It didn't feel as creepy. I got to talking with the building owner, and through the course of conversation, he just throws it out there and said that a former tenant committed suicide in the closet by hanging themselves. He also mentioned that the original designer of the building lived in that apartment and died there. I wasn't mad when I heard that, but felt validated that what I experienced was real. My house was built in 1904. It is a single-family home, wood frame setting on a concrete block foundation. I have been living here for about 12 years. Of all the weird things that my siblings and I have seen or heard in this house, this one event is my favorite. This happened to my brother. About 10 years ago, my brother and his best friends had started a garage band playing mostly Spanish rock, alternative music, but in Spanish. His friends could only get together on Sunday afternoons. They would practice into the early evening. They would usually call it quits by 8 p.m. This was the time I usually showed up and went to bed, cause I worked the graveyard shift. This happened in late fall, so the days were getting shorter. They had just finished a long session when the decision to head to someone else's house came about. My brother handed his car keys to his buddy so they could load up the equipment. Everyone had filed out of the basement. The tricky part was that they needed to walk all the way to the back of the basement, up the back stairs, through the kitchen doorway, down the hall, into the living room, and out into the front porch. Everyone was outside sitting in my brother's truck, waiting for him. My brother was walking up the back stairs when he remembered that he had left his pancakes in a to-go container sitting on a speaker in the basement. He made the decision to go back. Now the basement is not clean. With full sight lines, there have been partitions made, and the boiler and main heating unit are right smack in the middle. So after my brother walks back, he is about to retrieve his food container, when out of the corner of his eye, he sees it. It is a shadowy figure, right at his peripheral vision. This feeling of dread and uneasiness washed over my brother. We had been taught that if you are in the presence of a spirit or ghost and you felt a bad vibe, to say quick prayer or to cuss at it. My brother chose the latter. He basically just told it, "Hey, fuck you. I don't have time for this shit." My brother started to walk to the back of the basement and briskly up the stairs, closing doors and turning off lights as he was walking out. The last light switch is on the opposite side of the front door. Luckily, the door was open, and the light from the street lamp was flooding the living room with its amber light. My brother said he felt something at his back, but at no point did he turn around. As he flicked the last switch, the living room went dark, as did the rest of the house. As he stepped out, he pulled on the door, closing it behind him. Still holding his food container in one hand, he jogged down the few porch steps. He walked towards the front gate. Our house resides far from the main street, essentially having a large front yard but no rear garage. As he closed the gap between himself and his truck, he kind of smiled and thought things over in his head, mad at himself for spooking out when there was no reason. He climbed into the driver's side of the truck, putting on his seatbelt and getting ready to pull out of the parking spot directly in front of the house, when one of his friends asked, "Hey, wait, what about your brother? Isn't he coming with us?" My brother answered, "What do you mean? He went to work early tonight. He is already gone. Do you see his car anywhere?" The next question they asked, "So then who was walking behind you when you were leaving the house?" I've been a caver in Florida for about 13 years and have been to a lot of caves. Never been afraid before this to go in one. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I started having this recurring dream. I would have it at least twice a year, always the same, even though I would realize I was dreaming after the first few iterations. I would fall asleep and dream of being in a cave and going into this little hole in the bottom. Inside, I would see a 10 to 15 foot long corridor about 2 to 4 feet high. At the end, it would always turn left, and I always saw a bent red stop sign at the end, like someone ripped off the top 2 feet and tossed it in. But I would always follow the corridor. I would turn and walk past the sign despite being scared, despite many times knowing what was there, and the corridor would start descending, quickly opening up into a large vertical chamber with the path leading down in a corkscrew. Everything became blurry at this point, but it was always the same. I saw trash scattered on the walls. I saw the pit leading down to a curved floor. I saw things, undefined animals, or people, or something else at the bottom. And I saw my family, each with one of the things, being tortured and killed every time, and I could never do anything. After I saw that, I would be stuck for a few seconds until everyone turned and looked at me, and I would wake up, not like a normal dream where you just drift to consciousness, or a nightmare where you bolt up in fear, but like something pushed me out, like I wasn't supposed to be there. So I have this dream multiple times a year until I turned 15. I did tell a friend about the dream before and about what happened next. When my father decided to take us to some caves we had never been before, one of which was Dog Drop. It was likely named because someone either threw their pet in there or a coyote fell in and the body was later discovered. Dog Drop had a roughly 30-foot rappel straight down to enter. I went down with my brother while my father waited up at the top. There was a hole in the ground. I started to feel uneasy, although I didn't know why. So I followed my brother into the hole. I felt worse as I moved down. And when I looked up, I saw the same corridor, the same turn, the same wall, the same bottles at the corner. And I instantly was hit with this overwhelming sense of nausea and fear and being watched, and everything was screaming at me to leave. I froze and must have made some noise because my brother turned around and asked what was wrong. I managed to say I wanted to leave now and climbed out as quickly as I could, followed immediately by my brother. We packed up and left. Never have gone back and never will. Haven't told anyone what actually happened, just said I wasn't feeling well, and they forgot pretty quickly. The thing that really makes it creepy for me is I have never had the dream again. Year after year I would have it consistently, but it just stopped after that. But I still remember it all, and I still feel afraid, almost an external fear, when I think of it. When I was in high school, my uncle would throw me a couple bucks to help babysit his kids with my aunt. They lived in a 2-story house by the water, a nice area. The kids were about 3 and 6. One day I was sitting in their den and I was on my phone when I started to hear a baby crying. Thinking it was the 3-year-old, I headed to the bottom of the stairs to check and see if my aunt was up there dealing with it. I called for her a couple times with no response. The baby kept crying. I called for her one more time, and when I got no response, I started walking up the stairs. Then I heard my cousins and aunt playing outside. All the hairs on my body stood up, and I literally felt a chill run down my spine. I quietly turned around, walked down the stairs, got in my car, and drove away. The baby was still crying when I closed the door behind me. A few years later, I was drunk at a family party and told my uncle the story. He told me that he and his wife used to hear the baby too. And apparently the previous owners had a kid die of sudden infant death, or SIDS, in that room upstairs. He's uber Catholic and had a mass said for the baby. He said after that it never happened again. The scariest thing I've had happened while camping. So I live in Eastern Oregon, and my mom lives in Western Oregon. I went to visit her for the summer, and she's very outdoorsy, so we decided to take the 1-hour drive from her city to the coast. We ended up at this free campsite at the top of this hill, huge foothills of the coastal mountains, about a 25-minute drive from the top where the campsite is to the bottom where the main road was, and we were the only campers there. We relaxed for the rest of the day, made food and more. A truck full of men drive up the hill and talk with my mom. Wasn't suspicious at the time, and they leave us. Fast forward to the middle of the night. I wake up to my mom sitting straight up in the tent. I woke up easily, so I heard her gasp and it woke me. As soon as she saw I was awake, she put her hand over my mouth because I was starting to ask her what's wrong. It was dead silent, and all of a sudden heard footsteps right beside the tent. The little flap that covers the zipper was even moving. Thankfully, my mom has quick wits and said very loudly, "Kenny grabbed the gun." Kenny is my dad, although that doesn't matter. And mind you, he was not there. Just us girls, like I previously said. They left. No harm was done. Thank the Lord for my mama. I used to be in the military, and the training camp bunk that we lived in was said to be haunted. Occasionally, our stuff would go missing and reappear in weird places, like under our bed or inside a bag that we had zipped up and stuff. No big deal, right? I mean, human error and all. Then came the instance that freaked everyone out. It was one night after lights out, and my friend was on his phone texting his girlfriend. Most of us were drifting off to sleep and were lying on our beds. Suddenly, he heard the shuffling of feet from the corridor. So thinking that it was our sergeant, he quickly hid his phone under his pillow, rolled over on his side and pretended to sleep. Till this day, what happens next chills me to the bone. While he pretended to sleep, he heard someone right behind him, at the other side of his bed, going, "Don't worry, you can continue to pretend to sleep." I would dismiss this as a figment of his imagination, except about 5 other people around him heard it as well, including me. Creepier still, there was no one there, and it was the voice of a little girl that said it. For reference, our training camp was in the middle of an island and was set up away from the main admin blocks. The island has been closed by the government for army training purposes for the past 15 years, so there were definitely no civilians around, let alone kids. To make matters freakier, when we came back from our weekend home leave, there was a bunch of female hair on his bed, neatly bundled up, long and jet black. Under his pillow was a note, "Remember me." Now, as I said, we were in the middle of a forest, in the middle of an island, and at that point in time, there were no female recruits personnel on the island. Our bunks were locked up for the weekend, and the duty sergeant had no idea that the incident happened. We never spoke about it after that night. Still chills me to the bone thinking about it. Lived in an old 2-bedroom, 3-story walk-up for a time in my early 20s in Toronto. A few days after moving in, my roommate Mike chided me in the morning for banging on the wall that separated our bedrooms and pacing back and forth across the apartment at night. We just agreed he must have been dreaming, or it was sounds from other apartments, as I had done no such thing. We agreed that it must have been nothing and left it at that, but this became a regular nightly occurrence. Shortly thereafter, I started noticing at certain times in my own bedroom the cloying smell of cheap women's perfume mixed with a damp, musty smell. Imagine an old person's clothes left on a damp, musty basement floor near a litter box that wasn't being changed often enough, and you get the idea. What made it even weirder is that I would be filled with a sudden horrible sense of foreboding a few moments before the smell would begin. Mike flaked out and left only 4 months into our 1-year lease, which meant I was left footing the rent for the entire place until I could find another roommate. I had decided to try and sleep in his bedroom shortly after he moved to see if things would get better. The very first night I slept in his former room, I had an incredibly detailed and realistic nightmare of myself standing in the dimly lit bathroom of the apartment and cutting my own face with a large shard of glass while staring into the broken bathroom mirror. It was only broken in the dream. Soon after that, I started to hear the loud bangs at night, and the flushing of the toilet in the bathroom. Several times the hot water in the bathtub turned on full blast in the middle of the night. One of the freakier things that happened not too long before I moved is the time I was woken up by the TV blaring Poltergeist on City TV at about 2 in the morning. At the time, that channel would always play movies late at night, but the fact that the one time my analog TV turned on by itself at full blast was the time a movie like Poltergeist was playing. I began waking up every night around 3 a.m. feeling like something was about to hurt me. It was just this awful, knotted dread sitting in my stomach. My dog would often also wake up, hackles raised. There was a bathroom attached to my bedroom that I believe was the source of it. It had the worst energy. I always refused to use it. No matter how many times we changed the bulbs or tried to fix the wiring, the lights always flickered this ugly green color. The shower in it had a sliding door. Sometimes when I would awaken at night, I would hear the door rattling in its frame, hard. The AC had not kicked on, and the fan was not on. It only ever happened around 3 a.m. I would lie awake, staring at the bathroom door, waiting for it to slide open. Fortunately for my sanity, it never did. The shower door rattled alone in the dark bathroom, slamming against the sides of its track, but the bathroom door itself stayed shut. I once had a friend sleep over, and he bolted awake around that same 3 a.m. time frame whilst I was fucking around on my computer. He turned to me and told me he had felt suddenly very afraid, and that he wasn't sure what had woken him up. I hadn't told him a thing about what I had been experiencing. Just before moving out, I went in to clean that bathroom to prepare for the sale of the house. I heard a slight hum, like a woman singing. Nobody else was home, and no radio or television was on. I stopped to listen, as it was very quiet and very brief, and heard it again, directly in my left ear, loud and clear. I bolted outside and did not come back in until everyone was home. My mother would not let me talk to her about it. She would very angrily shut me down whenever I tried to bring it up, loudly shushing me and saying she didn't want to hear it. I think she was afraid of something. My brothers later admitted they had tried to have a ghost hunt in what they felt to be my haunted bathroom while I was away at soccer practice one afternoon. Even they were wary of it. I'm still not sure if I was just crazy or not, as nothing outrageous ever happened. I just remember the constant fear. I went with my best friend during high school for summer vacation to his grandparents who live in the countryside in Japan. I stayed in his mom's old room, which has a small wall closet. Just above this closet was a smaller closet door, like 1.5 feet tall and about 3 feet wide, just above it. Weird design, but their house is old. The first couple weeks I was pretty jet-lagged and Japan is hot and humid, so I didn't really sleep at night. If my light was off at night though, I always felt uneasy about that small closet space. Something about it just felt darker than the rest of the room. Toward the end of the second week, I started to adjust to the time difference. One morning I woke up and that small door was open. It was unsettling, but I closed it and just thought maybe it wasn't closed all the way and came loose. A couple nights later, I woke up feeling uneasy. It was dark and I could kind of see, and I could see that small door was open. It was much darker than the rest of the room, like black, pitch dark. This was the first and only time I experienced paralysis. I was too scared to move, say, or do anything. I just felt this darkness coming from there. I don't remember sleeping that night, but I must have, because I remember waking up the next morning. I told my friend about it, who said his mom told him about something like that too. When we got back home and I talked to his parents, his mom jokingly told me, "So, I heard you met the ghost." I was a rookie cop when my brother committed suicide. He was one of my older siblings, but we were very close. He died in another state, and I had a lot of guilt then about not recognizing the signs. His remains were in bad shape by the time he was discovered, so it was a closed coffin service. About a week after he died, I was back at work one night, and my partner and I saw a pimp whipping one of his girls. I jumped out, and the pimp saw me, and the foot chase was on. I was running after him, gun in hand, and he cut through a narrow corridor under a building that leads to a courtyard in the middle. Right before I reached the courtyard, I heard, "It's okay," in my dead brother's voice. I hit the courtyard and the guy is against the side pointing a gun in my head and squeezes the trigger twice. I froze for a millisecond and then started beating him in the head with my revolver. Till this day, I don't know why I didn't just shoot him. Cuff him and walk him back to the street and find my partner. I tell my partner about him squeezing the trigger, but not the voice I heard. We unload the gun .32 revolver right there, and 2 bullets have strike marks on them. Take the gun to the lab for testing. Tell the tech the story. He puts the 2 bullets with strike marks back in and shoots into the test tank. Both bullets fired. My stepmom and my dad used to work opposite shifts there for a while. He was on nights, her on days. They had a set of baby monitors from when my sister and I were babies. My dad said they could record short messages with them, and they would leave them out on the coffee table for the other to hear when they got home from their shift. This went on for a bit. Then once their shifts lined up, they put the monitors away in storage. She died of cancer at a really young age, and my dad had just gotten back from the funeral and was home alone. He spent that night going through their things, packing some of her stuff away. He said he had one of the baby monitors sitting out on the coffee table, and it woke him up in the middle of the night with an old message going off on repeat that she had recorded. It said, "I love you, Mike. I love you, Mike," over and over. My dad told me he just sat on the couch in the dark and listened to her message until the batteries died. A couple of weeks later, he had picked us kids up for the weekend. After my sister and I went inside, he said he was sitting on the porch smoking, and a strong gust of wind blew, and he said he could smell her perfume that she always wore. It scared me hearing those stories as a kid, but now I can see the beauty and peace in those experiences.
I was running on the trails at the Nathan Hale homestead, 18th century farmhouse and property of a Revolutionary War hero in CT, which is only about a 10-minute drive from my grandmother's lake house. I could not find a map of the trails anywhere online, and there didn't seem to be any signage at the place, just a bunch of random mountain bike trails in the woods. I was only going to run 4 miles, so I estimated that I would run for about 30 minutes, using my watch to keep myself on track. So I ran around the trails for a while, and nothing seemed too out of the ordinary. It was about 9 on a Monday morning, and the only sounds were the distant hums of Route 31, birds chirping, and the occasional squirrel or deer that scampered off whenever I came near. The trail seemed to wend around a lot, and if not for my better-than-average directional skills, I could have easily gotten lost. About 20 minutes in, I saw something strange about 50 meters off. A finely polished, light-colored wooden coffin. I was a little weirded out, to say the least, and waited until I got closer for a better look. I rounded a corner where several old tree stumps blocked my view, only to find that the coffin had disappeared. Where it should have been was a clump of ferns. I turned around shortly thereafter and made my way back to my car. I was maybe a half mile out when I heard a very distinctive knocking on a nearby tree to the rhythm of shave and a haircut, except no 2 bits. I was a little spooked but chalked it up to be a woodpecker or something. However, not 30 seconds later, there it was on a completely different tree up ahead somewhere. I picked up the pace. The trail widened a little and I could see way ahead the entrance to the parking lot where my car was. There it was again, on a tree seemingly right next to me. I truly started freaking out and started to book it back to the lot. I was nearing the opening when time seemed to slow down. All of a sudden it felt like the temperature dropped about 20 degrees. The birds stopped singing, and my simple Timex watch started to malfunction, making all sorts of beeping noises and the numbers glitching on the screen. The beat sounded impossibly loud this time, like it was hacked into every surrounding tree with a hand axe. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me as I anticipated hearing the 2 bits refrain, and perhaps worse. I burst into the parking lot, and everything went back to normal. The temperature was back in the mid-70s and birds were chirping away. I looked at my watch, only to discover that it had gone completely blank. I stood there and stared at it until it flashed 12 Monday 1st.01 January 1st. My watch had reset itself. It had never done this before. I got into the car and started the engine. The clock on the radio display read 12. That couldn't be right. It should have been around 9:30 or 9:45 at the latest. I put my car in reverse and backed up to where I could clearly make my way out to the main road. However, as I was about to throw the car into drive as it sat there, I heard a sharp rapping sound on the back window, like someone hitting it with their knuckles. There was no one else in the parking lot when I had finished my run, no cars, no nothing. I didn't dare look back and hightailed it back to my grandmother's house. I have no idea what could have caused this series of events and still cannot explain it to this day. When I was a kid, my brother and I would get stuck with babysitting the neighbor's kid. Alex was really fond of my Lego set that I had in the corner of my room, facing the window. He would play for hours, staying preoccupied, while my brother and I would play video games in the living room. So one night, when I fell asleep on the couch while babysitting, my brother came to me and said, "Alex is under your bed and shaking." I asked, "What's wrong with him?" My brother told me to follow him into the room and try to talk him back out from under the bed. I went inside to find him on the verge of tears as he was trembling profusely under my bed. I asked Alex, "What's wrong? Why are you under there?" Alex whimpered while looking at my sliding closet. As I walked toward the bed in order to help him out, he ran. He ran all the way back over to his house and waited on his front steps until his parents got home. Now my parents were out to dinner with him, and he explained the whole story in detail to both his parents and mine. His explanation sent shivers down my spine. When my brother and I left the house to meet up with his parents and find out what happened, my mom told me that Alex was playing with my Legos and heard a slight murmur from my closet, something that resembled a faint vocalization of "come here." He said that he looked behind him and noticed the closet had a slight opening with light peering in from my lamp. He stared at the crack until he saw an eyelid open. He told us that there was a man in my closet. Alex then hid under my bed after he gave out a slight yelp, which attracted my brother's attention. My family rushes back into my house and into my room. In horror, we find my closet door rocked open. My window had been left open when it was previously closed, and a few things knocked over which had not been touched previously. One weekend, I was at my dad's house. He'd come to the upstairs bathroom to get a shave and heard footsteps in my stepsister's room. I thought it was him walking around initially, so I got up to find him standing at her closed door. He looks back at me and whispers, "You can hear that too, right?" I nodded and he opened the door slowly. My stepsister was asleep and never had been awake apparently. There was no way she could have crossed the room, gotten in bed, and pretended to be that convincingly asleep in the 2 seconds it took my dad to open the door. He went in, checked her TV, which had never been on. She had one of those big ones from the 90s that would get warm when turned on. The radio hadn't been on either. Figured maybe it was the beat of a song or something. After that, we heard footsteps a bunch of times, usually very early in the morning. Some of the footsteps were so heavy, they'd shake the ceiling fan of the dining room directly under her bedroom, and they'd woken her up a few times as well. Whenever I'd shower at my dad's, I always felt like someone was standing behind me. Eventually, I got so stressed and paranoid that I refused to shower at the house or even go into the upstairs bathroom. My dad asked me one day, "Do you ever feel like someone's in the shower with you when you're here?" After months of me feeling that way and never mentioning it to anyone. When I was 6, I slept on a bunk bed in a room alone. The bottom bunk was empty, meant for my younger brother, but he was too scared of sleeping in a bed alone. So I was alone in that room that night. I remember a chilling feeling that night. Then it suddenly got really warm, probably because I was undergoing a night terror of some sort. Then I start breathing heavily and open my eyes and see the room is empty. My little night light in the corner of the room comforts me back to sleep, except as I closed my eyes I felt a heavy hand petting my shoulder. My eyes ripped open, and there was no one in the room. As soon as I lay back down, the petting continued, and I covered my head, just pretending to myself that it was my mom. It took me 12 years to stop sleeping with my head under the covers because of that memory. My mom, of course, knew a woman passed away in that apartment before we moved in, so she always believed it was that woman trying to comfort me.
This friend and a few of his college buddies were going on a similar ghost hunt themselves and had heard about some graveyards where children murdered by their mother had been buried. The graveyard was located off the main road, so my friend parked his car on the side of the road, and the group, 5 to 7 people I believe, got out and followed the small path through the woods for a couple minutes to get to the graveyard. Once there, Nothing exciting happened for the first 10 minutes or so, and they had tried everything the website or wherever they heard the story told them to do, with nothing resulting. They got bored, and being typical, inebriated college kids, started taunting the supposed ghost of the mother. This continued for a few minutes before they got tired, and decided to go back to the car as one of the girls had to go to the bathroom. Once they got back to the car, my friend, the sober driver, tried opening the handle without unlocking the car because he hadn't locked it in the first place, but found it locked. He attributed this to a bad memory at the time. The group drove home, laughing and talking like normal. After he had dropped all the others off at their homes, he went back to his own house. He got in at the same time as one of his roommates, who stopped and waited for him to pull in. The roommate had his phone out and shined the light in the window when his friend pulled in as a joke. What he saw was tiny, baby-sized handprints all over the windows. As soon as my friend got out, he went into the house without saying a word to the roommate. The roommate, confused, went back to the car and tried to rub one of the handprints. They were on the inside of the window. To this day, my friend will not speak of his drive home after he dropped off his other friends, and has since sold the car without ever driving it again. Once lived in a flat in downtown Mount Clemens, Michigan. The Clem was known to be a hot spot for baths back in the Depression era and was booming with activity. Nowadays it has some run-down parts. This is where my brother rented his flat. It was a giant old ragged house that was now separated into multiple odd apartments. Anyway, long story short, he always admitted to odd experiences, cabinet doors opening up, and things missing. But one peculiar oddity was that he was always missing boxers/underwear from his drawer. He admitted that he thought his house was haunted and that the ghost had a crush on him. Never anything violent or disturbing, just odd things. Later on, he starts dating his future ex-wife. She starts coming around, and he notices that the oddities begin to increase. New oddities began to occur. His girlfriend would always find her shoes, which were left on a mat inside the apartment, outside the door on the patio in the morning. She'd always comment to my brother to stop putting her shoes outside. He had an idea of why but didn't want to frighten her. Besides, it wasn't hurting anyone, right? Well, things started getting worse. He came home from work, and his girlfriend was staying there while he was gone, claiming that the stove burner kept lighting itself. She'd walk into the kitchen, and it would be lit. She'd turn it off, and shortly later it'd be lit again. Then, one night, my brother wakes up in the middle of the night and sees his girlfriend sitting at the end of the bed. Not only sees but feels her near his feet, staring at him. He calls out for her to come back to bed, but she doesn't respond, so he calls out louder, telling her to come to bed and asking, "What's wrong?" His girlfriend then asks what he's doing. He turns and saw that she's sleeping next to him. He turns back. No one is at the end of the bed. Now, he's freaked out but doesn't want to scare his girlfriend from coming over to his place. A few nights later, they're both sleeping and he wakes up to his girlfriend screaming. He looks over and she's sleeping but thrashing around holding onto her neck. He doesn't see anything, so he starts yelling and shaking her to wake her up. After a few shakes, she wakes up crying and terrified. She starts telling my brother about how real her dream felt, that a woman was strangling her, telling her to get out, that she doesn't belong there and to leave her man alone. Her neck had red marks on it, possibly from herself trying to defend herself, but they believed it to be from something else. My brother then comes clean with her, then decides to do some research and find out that the address that they live in was an old brothel back in the day that the rich bathers used to stay in. My brother lived in that house for a few more weeks before he could locate a new place. She never came back to stay the night though, and he never experienced anything aggressive while there. Still, kinda fucked up though. I know my brother and I can tell when he's lying. This shit was legit, and when she talked about it, you could see how shaken up she was. I have several stories from when I worked as a mortuary transport tech. The job was basically transporting the deceased from where they were to where they needed to go. Turns out dead people can have a lot of appointments. One time though, I had an experience I've never forgotten. I was dropping someone off at the science donation place. This is when you donate your body to science, and they take it from there. So I wheeled in the deceased, unlocked the freezer, and did all my stuff I had to do in there. I placed him on the board, got the lift out, and placed him on the shelf. The interesting thing about the freezer was that most everything, once it's processed, was wrapped in this blue tape type thing, and you could definitely tell what was inside. Legs, hands, feet, etc. Kind of interesting to me at the time. Anyway, I shut the freezer and locked it back up, and started wheeling the gurney back over to the garage door. The science drop-off and processing area was a big L shape, with the freezer off to the larger long portion, and then you turn the corner, and there's desks and filing cabinets and whatnot. I almost had a heart attack as I turned the corner, and there's just this guy standing there examining files in the file cabinet. Looked just like you or me, dressed modernly, but out of place for what people normally wear back there. I stopped and said that he'd have to forgive me, but he almost gave me a heart attack. It didn't look like he heard me at all, or even knew I was there. I should mention this was also about 1 a.m., and I'd never seen anyone at the place this late. So I said, well, sorry if I startled you or anything, and went on about my finishing stuff. Got the gurney back in the van, closed and locked the large garage door from the inside, all the while this guy is just standing there, staring at an open file in front of him, not paying any attention to me. I had to use the bathroom, so I told him that's where I'd be going and I'd be right back. Again, no response. I thought maybe he's deaf and couldn't hear me. So I went to the bathroom, and came back to the garage, and the guy is gone but the file cabinet is still open. I didn't know where he went, and I hadn't heard anyone walk down the hallway past the bathroom. I checked and made sure everything I was responsible for was still locked, and it was. So I just announced that I was going to be leaving and locking up to set the alarm. No response. And that's what I did, and left. I'm not sure who he was, or is, or what happened. But it was definitely an odd experience, and one I still remember perfectly. My grandfather was extremely sick in the days leading up to his death. He'd worked with asbestos for all his working life and had an extremely debilitating form as a result of it. He couldn't speak, and he hadn't spoken for a month leading up to his death. He couldn't even communicate. On the day of his death, he looked at my mother and said, "The angel is back." My mother was stunned. She asked what he meant, and he said the angel is back, and this time he wants me to come with him. My mother looked at the corner of the room where he was looking, turned back to him, and said, "Dad, there's nobody there." He didn't respond. He died that night. That was 20 years ago, and my mother never spoke of it again. She told me the story when I was old enough, just like she told my brothers, but my sister never got to the age where she was old enough. She succumbed to her disease when she was 7, after battling it her entire life. And on the days leading up to her death, she kept speaking about this butterfly who would visit her. My brothers and I would sit with her and nod along. We kind of just thought she'd developed this imaginary friend to help her through what she was struggling with. One day, she shot up and told us the butterfly is back, and he wants me to follow him. I saw my mother's face drop. She'd made the decision not to tell my sister she was dying, and my sister just believed she was going through a rough patch like she often did, not that the doctors had told my mother it was terminal. But my sister said in the next second, "I'm going to die, aren't I?" That's what the butterfly said. He told me I'm going to die. My mother admitted to her that, yes, she was going to die. She said, "Oh, okay," then laid down and died, with my brothers, my mom and I cuddling her in bed. I don't know what I believe about the afterlife, but I have to think there must be one. That there's some truth behind the legend of the Grim Reaper, that at some point, something comes to lead all of us away from life. Because otherwise, I have no way of coming to terms with what I've experienced.
One of my many experiences with night terrors, sleep paralysis left me with memory loss, and now I have to live with the fact that my body kinda operated without me for a week. I was about 7 years old and woke in the middle of the night to find this smoke creature crawling up the bottom of my bed. It was terrifying, as you can imagine, and I booked it for the landing. Which is weird for me because looking back, I would have expected it to be sleep paralysis. I still get these occurrences often, but I could move perfectly well on this occasion. I reached the top of the stairs outside my bedroom, and another one was slowly making its way up, step by step out of the darkness of the floor below. I froze and looked around for somewhere else to run to, but I was pinned because the first one was making its way through my bedroom doorway toward me. Both of these smoke demon things were advancing on little 7-year-old me, so I did the only thing I could think of, screamed the house down. Mum comes running just as I start to go blind with smoke creeping into my vision. My blood pressure was wonking out. It was the same smoke I get when I stand up fast. Mum ends up soothing me, taking me back to bed, and at some point she leaves and lets me go back to sleep. The next morning I apologize for waking her up last night. She has no idea what I mean and we're both confused. I tell her I woke you up on the stairs. I was having a nightmare. She informs me that that happened over a week ago, not last night. I have no memory of that week occurring, not a single shred, but apparently I had gone to school every day, played with my friends, eaten my dinner, done my homework, and had my baths, all without knowing that I had done it. Apparently I'd been kinda quiet during that week, and my mum assumed I was having trouble at school, which was not an uncommon experience for me. But I still, to this day, don't remember anything after that night, and it gives me the creeps to imagine that my body has done things, gone through the motions of everyday life, without me having any knowledge of doing it.
Years ago, I remember sneaking out of my friend's house at night to really do nothing but walk around the neighborhood and hide from car headlights. We were young and bored. There was a homeless camp that was down in some woods off the railroad tracks not too far from his house. We had seen the trail and knew what was back there. One of the homeless guys that lived there was actually an old friend of my buddy's dad. And he had stopped over a few times, and my friend's dad let him shower there and everything. He could have worked if he wanted, but he legit told us he just liked living off the grid. Just wanted to give you some backstory on the reason why we thought it would be cool and safe to go check it out at night. We were a bit nervous at first, thinking, what if we get there and his dad's friend isn't there? So we were sneaking up on it. It was a longer walk than we thought. We got kind of close and saw there was a fire going, lighting up the woods a bit. We started sneaking closer, but the trail seemed to continue straight, while the camp set off the trail to the left. We got, I don't know, maybe 100 feet from the camp, about 30 meters, and we looked down the trail and saw a faint silhouette of what we thought was a person. The silhouette looked like it was coming from deeper in the woods towards the camp. We froze and ducked slightly to the side of the trail. I told my friend that I didn't like it and that we should just sneak the hell out. He said he had the same feeling. As I said, the fire at the camp was just enough to light the area well enough to see. We end up slowly creeping slightly off the trail back to the railroad tracks. We get probably 30 to 40 or so feet, 9 to 12 meters. And I told him I would rather just hit the trail and just slowly walk back because the bushes and trees and everything were hard to navigate, and I would rather be able to see something coming so we could book it out. We played football and were both pretty fast. We slide out of the brush and see the silhouette has gotten closer. However, moving further from the fire, the light was dimmer, but we could still make out someone or something was standing there moving closer. My first thought was that maybe they saw us duck into the bushes and were coming to check, but it just felt off. My friend and I looked at each other and both mutually and silently decided to pick up the pace. Almost on cue, we both looked back, and the silhouette was now booking it towards us, absolutely silent. No noise, just fast movement. We hightail it as fast as we can. Thankfully, the trail was wide, so we weren't bumping into each other or anything. Neither of us looked back until we hit the railroad tracks, then hit the railroad track bridge, and were on the other side. I looked back as I was slowing down past the bridge and didn't see anyone. We got back to his house pretty fast, and luckily that was the end of it. When I was 17, I was hanging out with two friends, and they wanted to go smoke weed in the woods. I didn't feel like it, so I drove them and waited in the car. After a while, I was getting bored and decided to go meet them, but there were 4 paths going off in different directions. So I just took the biggest one. After walking for a few minutes in the pitch-black forest, before flashlights on phones, I come across this dip in the trail, and on the other side is a bench lightly visible due to the moonlight. On the bench is sitting a man, and another one is standing in front of him, but I can only make out silhouettes. Being sure these are my friends, I yell out to them before walking over. If you ever walk the woods at night, it's just an uneasy feeling all around, so I was cautious to begin with. Well, it turns out, Just after yelling out to my friends, both silhouettes turn around towards me. Not a word, not a sound. The guy sitting down starts sprinting full fucking speed towards me in complete silence. I got the absolute fuck out of there, sprinting also the other way and tripping over shit because I couldn't see anything. I finally got out and locked myself in my car, but I was really worried for my friends. Maybe a minute later, I saw them both coming out of a completely different path. They also confirmed they had never seen me or anyone else. My heart still sinks just thinking about that dude sprinting in silence. What the fuck was that shit? I work the midnight shift at a gas station, and I have for quite a while at various stations in different areas with varying levels of criminal activity. I have regulars, of course. I'm a small-statured woman, as is my partner the other half of the week, and we've always been partners. So these regulars often worry about us and keep watch on creepy occurrences when they can. I had one man who worked in the metro an hour away who would stop in every morning for his cigarettes. He never smiled or seemed friendly, and as I often do, I tried to think of what I could do that might make him smile one day. It took many months, but I finally pulled it off by having his cigarettes ready on the counter and already scanned for him to pay for as he walked in. He smiled and then asked me, "Do you ever get scared on the night shift? You, small girl, are not safe." I said I sometimes did, but we could lock the doors and hide if we had to, and that the provincial police, think state troopers if you're American, had a station close by and came in often to get their highway vehicles washed. I had a good rapport with those police. He nodded and then told me a story about when he first moved to our country from Eastern Europe with his wife and child back in the late 80s and early 90s. He fell asleep at work one night at the gas station he worked midnights at. When he woke up, the phone had been ringing for hours, and his manager was shaking him violently, asking if he was all right. He was fine, he said. What was the problem? He was sorry he fell asleep. His manager screamed that it was fine he fell asleep, to look outside. All of their motor oil was missing, and the outside of the place was a mess. The thieves had come and swiped all the oil and left him be because he slept through the entire thing, and then moved down the road to the next station for an encore. At that station, the clerk was awake and fought back, so the thieves stabbed him to death and left him to bleed out. When he finished telling me this, he concluded with, "If you ever feel sleepy, just lock the door and do it. It might save your life." I don't work at that station anymore, but I think about that guy all the time and wonder how his grandkids are. I'm still looking for a logical explanation for this. This happened in 2003. So my ex and I checked in a coastal resort where the cottages were far apart, like 200 meters away. Around 11 to 11:30 p.m., while we were both drinking beer with the lights turned off and only the TV on, the doorknob suddenly rattled violently, like someone was forcibly trying to get it open. There was no double lock on the door, so my first reaction was to jump from the bed and block the door with my weight. The force of my landing must have been heard from the other side, but the twisting of the doorknob continued. By this time, I was already pressing my face to the floor, trying to look and estimate how many people were outside the door via the small gap between the floor and the bottom of the door. There was nothing, not one pair of feet or anything, but the doorknob just kept rattling. I should point out that the gap between the floor and the door was enough for me to see the outside, or at the very least, notice any change in shadow or light caused by movement, but there was nothing. The turning of the door knob then stopped, but I never heard any footsteps or any other noise. Waited a few minutes and opened the door. Everything was quiet. No footprints outside or on the sand surrounding the cottage. We just noped out of there immediately. My mother's story. I've no reason to doubt her, and she's never told another or been concerned with the supernatural. She does have a vaguely spiritual streak, but that's all. Mostly, she's pretty no-nonsense. When she retired, she got heavily into family history. At some point, she obtained the diary of my dad's mother, who'd passed perhaps 20 years previously, whom we all called Nan. Nan had been a very stiff and proper English type, called everyone dear, used adjectives like terribly and perfectly dreadful, and was always relentlessly formal and seemed to be slightly offended at all times. She was also an intensely private person and never wanted anyone to know her business. So one night, my dad was away, and my mother, home alone, sat down with the diary and started going through it. It starts raining, nothing unusual since they live on the coast. She gets up and closes a few windows, goes back to the diary. The rain turns into a storm. It gets windy. She goes to the other room and shuts the windows there, comes back to the diary. A few more minutes go by. She's been looking at the diary for maybe 15 minutes at this point. Suddenly, the intercom to her right bursts to life at full volume with just static coming from the speaker. They live in a 3-story house on the side of a hill that was originally built by an electrician, so there are a million lights and power points on every wall, and every room has an intercom. After recovering from the fright, she turns off the intercom. The one in the next room is still going full blast. She gets up and shuts that off, and can hear the rest of the house downstairs still going. Every intercom. She heads down to the middle level where the master unit is and turns the intercom off. She's heading upstairs when she notices all the pictures on the walls. My mother is heavily into hanging things on the walls. Big, small, paintings, family photos. There's a lot of frames on the walls, are all askew, all at similar angles, not random. Meanwhile, the storm has increased. The floor she is on is lined the length of the house on one side with timber-framed windows. Even the tops of the windows are wet with rain, which rarely happens and takes a proper storm to do. As she stood there taking this all in, what she can only describe as an intense gust of wind rattles the windows from one end of the house to the other as if a speeding train went past on the balcony outside. Instead of fleeing into the night in search of a hotel room and real estate agent, as I would have done, she walks calmly upstairs, calmly shuts the diary, calmly puts it in a cupboard, shuts the cupboard, says, "Sorry, Nan," to the empty room, and goes to make a cup of tea. The storm dies down. She writes all the pictures. That's that.
When I was in 4th grade, we had buddy classes with first graders to help teach them how to write and read properly. My buddy was Cameron Bell. He was a 6-year-old blonde boy who was a bit quiet but loved to draw angry birds. One morning, I came to school and my teacher was in tears. There was a police officer in the room beside her. As we sat down after the bell rang, we were told that due to an unfortunate series of events, Cameron had passed away. After school, I rushed home to find out that due to the loss of his mother years prior, his father took him to the nearby church and shot him in the head before shooting himself. I still shake thinking about Cameron and the innocence that was taken. I missed his messy handwriting and angry bird drawings. It's been 9 years since the tragedy, and his smile still haunts me. I am an ICU RN. We had a septic patient in the unit. She was 29 weeks pregnant. She went into labor on my shift, and we delivered her stillborn baby. I did post-mortem care on the baby, retrieved the proper transport container, and walked the baby down to the morgue. It was the middle of the night, and I'm in an elevator alone. I hear a baby start wailing. I absolutely lose my shit and rip open the cover, and just as I go to zip down the bag, I hear a calming male voice say, "Hush, little one, I've got you. No need to cry." The crying stopped immediately. Shaking, I opened the bag and saw exactly what I expected to see. A deceased 29-week-old baby. I am a big-bearded 40-year-old ICU nurse, and that was the scariest shit I've ever experienced. No one believes me to this day. I don't even want to speculate on what the crying or the voice were. Not a funeral home, but I worked at one of the last booth homes for pregnant girls in the early 2000s. Lots of dead babies and some dead moms in the history of that campus. We had a number of creepy things happen, to the point that I brought it up in a staff meeting, and the social workers just said, "Oh, it must be time to have the building blessed again." But what stuck with me was the baby swing. I came into the living room and found it swinging by itself hours after all the teenagers were in bed. Now, this was an ancient mechanical wind-up swing. You had to turn a crank to start it. There was no electricity involved. There was no way it just started on its own. And there it was, swinging full force. I was completely terrified, but I just said, "If you want to swing, I will be happy to wind up the swing for you. But when you do it on your own, it frightens people." Every night for the rest of the year or so I worked there, I wound that swing up and let it go. I told other staff members, and I believe they did the same. I like to think it was a sweet baby ghost who just wanted attention and we gave it attention. Later they closed the program for parenting teens and made the whole place a homeless shelter. Now I am sitting here worrying about my ghost baby. Is it lonely? I hope not. I used to work on an oncology ward as a nurse. Our side rooms were kept for end-of-life patients on palliative care, and one patient that we had been nursing for a good few weeks died early one morning. The last office had already been done by the night staff, and the patient had moved to the hospital morgue, so all that remained was to clear the room of personal belongings and tidy up. I sent a student nurse that I was mentoring at the time to do this while I got on with the drug round. The student had known the patient fairly well and was comfortable with this job. About 10 minutes later, a colleague came to me and told me that my student had come flying out of the side room white as a sheet and was sobbing in the staff room. I went to find out what the problem was, and the student told me she had been clearing out the sink area in the bathroom. I glanced up and saw the deceased patient reflected in the mirror, looking at her over her shoulder. My student was a sensible girl, not given to hysterics, but for the remainder of her placement on that ward, she would not go near that side room. I'm a nurse. I've witnessed quite a lot with Alzheimer's patients. They often develop their own scenarios in their own heads, often accompanied by vivid hallucinations. Once during the night shift, I heard a woman scream in fear. Checking on her, she managed to climb into her wheelchair in pure panic, wanting to flee her bedroom. Asking what was wrong, she thought the building was on fire. Now, what's important to mention here is, people often make claims that people are just crazy or dreaming badly or something. But this is not the case. People with hallucinations have been found to actually see, hear, smell, etc. something when their hallucinations occur, as the same locations in the brain are stimulated as if they would get real impulses. That woman actually saw fire. She actually smelled fire. She didn't just make that up to be crazy. It's what her brain told her was happening, and she was in real panic for her life. And the same applies to when those people see someone else in their room. When they want me to guide someone out of the bedroom who isn't actually there, seemingly standing right behind me. And it makes no sense to discuss with them that no one's there. To them, someone is there, and you better do your best effort of improvising to guide that someone even if it's no one outside. Play along, and they'll be fine. This, to me, is the scariest thing at work. They see something you don't.